You never forsake those who make their boast of your mercy. Amen. Please be seated. Whoever sows injustice will reap calamity. Those who are generous are blessed, for they share their bread with the poor. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but do not have works? Faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. The theme resounds through today's lectionary pretty clearly. Coming to church, assembling and praying together, following our own individual spiritual practices, these things are necessary, but not sufficient. Ringing through all of today's readings is the central commandment of our faith: to love God with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind, and through that commitment, to love our neighbors as ourselves. And that love of neighbor isn't simply wishing someone well. It's a practical love. It's an active love. This is the core, and each week, in fact, we conclude our worship praying, "Send us out from this place to do the work you have given us to do." And then we are dismissed with a hearty "Go in peace to love and serve." Faith without works may be a starting place, but Proverbs, Psalms, James, Mark, and indeed the whole Judeo-Christian tradition remind us that we are called to more. Sometimes, though, and I would suggest particularly right now, it may be hard to know what that more is. In fact, right now, at least for me, the potential works we could dedicate ourselves to are so numerous and so consequential that it can feel overwhelming. There is so much need right now. It's almost hard to even hold the list in our head all at the same time, much less take in the human impact. Any of us could offer our litany of all the events we've been watching take place. In rapid succession, Haiti has experienced a presidential assassination, a devastating earthquake, and the ruinous impact of Hurricane Grace. We're watching the results of climate change unfold and the destruction of Hurricane Ida from Louisiana through New York, the loss of lives from flash floods in Tennessee, fires burning across the West. Over the last few weeks, we've seen the human cost of our country's withdrawal from Afghanistan. And underlying all of this, a surge of COVID infections coinciding with the return of students and teachers to school, just as we had started to think we were emerging from pandemic. It's overwhelming. I came across an article in the Atlantic magazine a couple of weeks ago. The author was wrestling with the impact of this accumulation of tragedies we are living with. As he put it, for the better part of 2 years now, the world has been living through a pandemic. Virtually everyone has felt the pain in one way or another. Meanwhile, the world's baseline drumbeat of catastrophe has not faltered. Wildfires have filled the skies with smoke, earthquakes have leveled cities, buildings have collapsed without warning. How, he asked, is this affecting our ability or our inability to empathize? How do we take this all in? How do we know where to start? It's way beyond me. But as today's gospel passage suggests, even Jesus might have become overwhelmed by the pressing needs of the crowds around him. We read that Jesus sought solitude and rest. If we follow the sequence of events in the Gospel of Mark, we see that prior to today's reading, the community had just endured the murder of John the Baptist. Then Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee again with his disciples, arriving on the other side to find that people recognized him straight away. We are told they rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, villages, cities, or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And then finally, seeking some time apart in today's passage, Jesus enters a house and we hear him say, "Don't tell them I'm here." He needed a moment apart. Yet, we hear, he could not escape notice. So when the Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile, approaches Jesus, he doesn't seem to have the expansiveness in that moment to respond to her plea. Instead, in his response, he limits his mission, prioritizing a focus on the Jewish people. "Let the children," that is the Israelites, "be fed first," he says. "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." On the face of it, not a response of compassion and loving kindness. Until the woman reminded him that all people are part of God's vision of justice and well-being, even Jesus momentarily lost his focus, it would seem. And if even Jesus could be affected by compassion fatigue, where does that leave us? You might not find it surprising that I do not have an answer to that question, but as I sat with this week's readings, I was asking myself, okay, well, faith without works is dead. I got that, but now what? What makes this real in our lives? And as I rolled the question around in my mind, I realized that my attention was being drawn back to one word: mercy. It shows up in today's collect, for example. "You never forsake those who make their boast of your mercy." We use this word mercy a lot. So often, in fact, it for me is one of those words that can start to feel vague or sloppy or rote. As a church, for example, we've been responding to prayer petitions with the words, "Lord, have mercy," since at least the 4th century. So I think it's worth lingering over this word. We might define it as steadfast or unwavering love, or perhaps as loving kindness. We could say that mercy is compassion backed by practical action. Mercy is central to our Judeo-Christian understanding of God, and some would say mercy is the attitude that marks God's relationship with us. We may be seeing evidence of God's mercy peeking through the lines of the epistle today when James asks questions like, "Has not God chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom?" In addition to making a couple of appearances in our lectionary this week, the word mercy coincidentally also arrived in my email on Friday morning as that morning's offering from the brothers at the monastery. I know that some of you received their email each morning. It's called "Brother, Give Us a Word," and Friday's word was mercy. So I'll share with you Brother Sean's reflection. "It is not our work or our strength," he says, "that makes us whole. No program will lift us to that place from which we finally lose our tiny, creaturely perspective. The only thing that can restore our vision is the mercy of God. Our invitation as God's people is not to pretend to be good or pious or saintly. It is to open ourselves to the searching, active mercy of God. For many of us, it would seem, certainly in my case, it is counter to our nature to think that the way to respond to the urgent needs of the world is to step back, to relinquish self-reliance. As today's collect reminds us, perhaps in different language than I would choose, but that's a topic for a different day, we're reminded that when we rely on our own strength, when we are proud, in the words of the collect, those are the times when it's hardest to experience God with us. Those are the times when we lose our broader vision and our ability to discern the works we are being called to. We can only sow justice, we can only share our bread, as Proverbs counsels. We can only back up our faith with the works of God, as James calls Christians to do, when we realize that it's not our work or our strength that makes it possible. It's only through opening ourselves to the steadfast love of God, it's only through taking a deep breath and realizing that we don't have to do it all, that we can then take in the needs of the world, as crazy as it is right now, and discern how we, each in our unique way, can do our part bit by bit to bring God's justice to the world. Lord, have mercy.